Joining me on the phone, ladies and gentlemen, it is Congressman John Linder, the congressman, of course, representing Georgia's 7th Congressional District here in the House of Representatives. Congressman, welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you very much. Nice to be with you.
Nice to meet you. I take it your holidays went well and you had family time and relaxed time after what you've been through over the last few months in D.C.?
We did indeed. We had a good, relaxing Christmas in Mississippi with the grandkids and my daughter and her husband, and we spent a quiet New Year's Eve right here.
And you're getting ready to go back after it. I'm assuming you'll be taking off this weekend?
I will be on the 11:20 Sunday morning.
And I'll tell you, this is a pretty critical time. Before we talk about some of the things that await you, let's talk about your signature piece of legislation, the FairTax. It is H.R. 25. I've done a number of interviews over the years about the FairTax. My question is, well, I got a lot of them, but where would we be right now with this recession if we actually had the FairTax in place?
Well, had we had the FairTax in place during George Bush's 8 years, the only loss in revenues would have been about 0.8% because that's the only quarter we lost. We actually had a decline in the GDP. So we'd had growing revenues, we'd had growing jobs, and the liquidity problem that came to the banks would have been fixed by outside money because there's about $13 trillion in dollar-denominated deposits sitting in offshore financial centers that won't come here because of the IRS. And I talked to Ben Bernanke about it. I said, Ben, you wouldn't have to spend a penny. Those folks that come in and buy these banks. We ultimately will come to a pure consumption tax for that reason. We're spending too much money complying with a complicated code. Too few people are paying taxes. As you know, 1% of the American income earners pay 40% of all the taxes. And we don't have any place else to go from here. Ultimately, whether I'm here or not, we'll come to terms with the fact that the pure consumption tax is the best way to go, and I think the fair tax is perhaps in the lead in those proposals.
Are we closer now than we were a few years ago of this becoming a reality?
Yeah, because we can't fix this by just taxing rich people more. Every time we come to a dilemma, the answer by the left, or any commission that's ever been proposed with the left and right in it, from the 1983 Social Security Commission to the 2005 Tax Reform Commission, all come up with the same answer: tax rich people more. Well, guess what rich people are doing? They're moving. Maryland came up with that scheme a year ago. They had 3,000 very, very high income earners. They're just going to tax them. Well, 1,000 of them left the state within months. This just can't keep going on.
There are a lot of misconceptions about the fair tax. I was looking online, and there's a lot of critics out there saying that it's illogical, that it's too good to be true. What do you say to those folks when it comes to the fair tax?
Well, I hear that's too good to be true a lot, and my answer is we're going to be driven to it. We're going to be driven to it because we need to have a tax system that is broader based, that protects the poor, which the fair tax does, and that treats everybody else the same. We need to have a tax system that doesn't cost us $500 billion a year just to comply with it. We spend about $400 billion a year just filling out IRS paperwork. We spend another $100 billion a year calculating the tax implications of a business decision. This is like paying for a dead horse. You get nothing for it. Under a consumption tax or the fair tax, you just pay at the counter, just like you do in 45 states with sales taxes right now.
Now, for some of my listeners that might not be aware of the fair tax, and I don't know where they've lived over the last 10 years, can you just give us a general overview of what it is?
Sure. We just eliminate all taxes on income. All of the income tax code is repealed. We abolish the IRS, and instead of taxing what you earn, we tax what you spend. Instead of currently the average income earner gives the government 33 cents out of every dollar they earn, under the fair tax they'd give the government 23 cents out of every dollar they spend. And then every household, rich or poor, because we're not going to know how much money you have, we're not going to have an agency that tracks that. Every household would get a check at the beginning of every month sufficient to based on the size of the household, that would be sufficient to totally untax that household up to poverty-level spending. And poverty-level spending, by definition, is that spending necessary to buy your essentials. So effectively, for every household, we untax essentials. Now, it could be that somebody's going to spend that money at the dog track. Not my problem. Every household could live with all their essentials paid for, and everything else is discretionary, and every other penny will be taxed the same. Let me explain something that people don't think about very often, but we have never taxed wealth in this country. We tax wages. Our income tax, our Social Security tax, and our Medicare tax is based on how much wages you earn. Under this system, your wages would not be taxed. Your spending would. The first thing wealthy people do in this country is stop getting a wage. They live on capital gains and dividends, and they get no wages. And so they pay very little in taxes. Under our system, that wealth would be spent. It may not be spent by the people holding it today, but they're going to die someday, and it's going to be spent by their heirs, and it'll be taxed evenly across the board. And for the first time, wealthy people would be sharing in these burdens.
If you're just joining me, it's Congressman John Linder on Denny Radio. Congressman, what would happen to Social Security under the fair tax?
They would be funded differently, but everybody still get their revenues under the same, or their income under the same basis. It would just be funded out of the 23 cents you take out of every dollar you spend. 8 cents goes to retirement benefits such as Social Security and Medicare, and the 15 cents goes to run the government.
Would you say the reason why the fair tax hasn't become a reality, is it based on the fear of the people or the fear of Washington?
Washington. Oh, this is a no-brainer. I've been in 30 states talking about this over the last 8 or 9 years, and the people are way ahead of the politicians. There's very little leadership in Washington. They got their finger to the wind. They're trying to figure out where the wind's blowing. And in Washington, this is hated, not necessarily by the political class, but everybody else who lives in Washington, because their income as lobbyists and people who live off the government, make their income representing people for the government. All those people are vested in the current system. They worked at the Finance Committee or Ways and Means Committee or a Joint Committee for Taxation, and they get out and they know how to manipulate the tax code, and they influence politicians. So most of the politicians, I would say, in Washington have friends in that group of people. They used to be staffers or they're just current friends. And if they ask a question of their friends in downtown Washington, they're going to hate it. Because, in fact, I've had the lobbyists tell me, just give me a couple more years. They're making money off this system. In the 1950s, now, first of all, I'm one who says that corporations not only don't pay taxes, they can't pay taxes because they have no income. The only way corporations pay taxes is to take the money from you and give it to the government. It's a pass-through.